The Shepnaz Podcast begins now.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to the Shepnaz Podcast. As always, I am your host, Pastor Zack, here for the start of your week. If you're listening to this on release day with my good friend, the man, the myth, my pastor, your pastor, Pastor Rob Paugh. Welcome in, pal.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, we were just talking about how we got nothing going on around here. It's really chill.
Yeah.
And we're just excited to dig into the sermon.
We are. Yeah.
With a clear mind.
There's a little bit of, at least it's like, can always come back to this.
Right.
No matter how crazy things, everything else is, right here.
100%. Well, that's one of the, something we're going to be rolling out a little bit more is one of the things that we really value around here and that we believe in is that, like, we just build on what doesn't change. Like, we value the word. It is important, and we're just building off of what never changes. So when our circumstances are crazy, when things are crazy around here, we can always come back to the word, man. So it doesn't change, doesn't move. So we are in now week 2 of a brand new series. And we're going to be digging into the story of Nehemiah. And last week, you gave us a lot of history, a lot of, facts, statistics, and how we kind of talked about a little bit last week. Like, I struggle with the liturgies and the numbers and the facts. But what was unpacked last week is like how those details just highlight the amazing way that God works things out. Yeah. It's insane. Yeah. For all these people, for this to be a relative of Esther and all these pieces that came together to make this. It is such a powerful thing.
It's amazing.
It's bonkers.
Yep.
It's bonkers. But this week, we're digging into the why. We're digging into the meat of it. So.
Yeah. Well, another thing. So we started in chapter 1. Last week was all the background info. This week we kind of meet Nehemiah, the situation, and the last verse of the first chapter says, "I was cupbearer to the king." And so I want to start at the last verse of this chapter because that is important information to know.
It's a big role to have.
So he says, he was a cupbearer, and it kind of maybe sounds like a menial position or, he just washed dishes or whatever.
Right.
But actually the cupbearer was a really important role. And it's interesting that God put Nehemiah, who was a Jewish person, in this role for King Artaxerxes, who was not a Jewish person, who was king of the Persian Empire, which was the dominant power then. And so a cupbearer did just exactly that. He was the one who handled the king's wine and other beverages, which included tasting it before the king in order to ensure safety. So typically a common way that you would assassinate a leader or a king back then was to poison him. Right. You may not have access to him to kill him physically or whatever, so you poison his wine or poison their food or whatever. And, they knew this. And so what they devised is a person who would taste their food and their wine before they drink it. Yeah. And so that's what Nehemiah was.
Which is such a terrifying job.
It is. I mean, literally, he put his life on the line every day. Yep. And so you drink the wine in front of the king, and if you don't die, the king drinks it too.
Then you're good.
If you die, he's like, I think I'll pass. I mean, that's what he did.
That's crazy.
And so it was interesting. Some things I learned about it though that were interesting is that he wasn't the only one. Like, he was the head one, and there was probably a staff. And so, if one guy dies, you got to have another one ready. So there was a staff, and they would also make sure that the wine supply was secure, no one had access to it, and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, right before the king would drink it, the cupbearer would put a little bit in his hand, drink it in front of the king so he could see. And if he didn't die, then the king would go on. So it doesn't sound like a great position because we said you're literally putting your life on the line. Yeah. But the cupbearer was actually a very influential position for the king because by virtue of his position, he is present for many of the conversations that the king has. And so he's literally privy to all kinds of information that no one else in the kingdom would know. Right. Because, if the king's having a dinner or, we do a lot of business over lunch and stuff like that. They meals were the big thing. So the cupbearer is present. He hears these conversations. He's got all this confidential information. He has this great deal of knowledge about the kingdom and the things that are happening in the kingdom. And so what happens is a king who was smart would get a cupbearer who was wise. Right. Like I'm gonna first of all, I got to trust the guy that he's not going to go blabbing because he's hearing things, right? So Nehemiah was a trusted person to the king, and he was wise because oftentimes the king would say, well, you heard that conversation. What do you think about it?
Yeah.
So they developed a relationship. There was a level of closeness to them. As a result of that, this was a pretty lucrative position.
Right.
Like it was, one of the higher paying jobs in the king's cabinet or whatever. It did carry a fair amount of risk,
Right.
but it was that. So the other thing is that, a cupbearer, in those days, if you were to stand close to the king in public, we would call this very superficial today, but they wanted somebody who was handsome,
right.
who was cultured, who was knowledgeable, who was well-spoken, because he reflected on the king.
Right.
So if you have some sloppy guy who's unkempt and can't speak well and just licks the wine and doesn't die, that's not, it all reflects on him. So Nehemiah was a really sharp guy. Again, they measured importance. Importance was measured by having access to the king. And maybe no one else had more access to the king than the cupbearer. So it was a kind of a big deal. And we talked about how last week, the exile or the return to the Exodus back into Jerusalem happened in 3 waves.
Yep.
And so where we are in Nehemiah now, the first wave had happened, and it was about 100 years ago. So it was actually possible for Jews to go back to Jerusalem for about 100 years. And Nehemiah was a Jew, but he didn't go back.
Right.
And I think there's just something to lift out of that, the fact that he's like, he loved Jerusalem. He loved the people. In fact, we'll see the first question he asked his brother is like, what's going on there? Tell me. Because it's not like it was on the nightly news or anything. But he could have returned, but he didn't. He stayed in Persia, a pagan culture, to serve Xerxes, Artaxerxes, a pagan king. And I think that speaks to the fact that he stayed in like if you're a Jew serving in that royal court or whatever, there was certainly uncomfortable things for him. They worshiped gods. They worshiped gods that he didn't worship. He saw things and probably that he didn't want to see or whatever. But he stayed there, and I think he stayed there probably out of a sense of a call that God had put him there. Much like Esther, God put Esther in the court that she was in. She was a Jew in an ungodly royal court. Nehemiah is the same way. But I just think it says a lot about Nehemiah that he stayed in his difficult spot because he felt like that's where God wanted him to be. And I think there are probably some people who are working or serving in a position or environment or work for a boss that's uncomfortable, and you're like, gosh, this isn't a Christian environment. I'm not around Christian people. I hear things I don't want to hear. I see things I don't necessarily want to see or whatever. But I just want to encourage you that, it could be that God has you there for a reason. If everybody who carries the light leaves the darkness, the darkness is really dark.
Exactly.
And Nehemiah was a light in a dark place. And if that's you, I just want to encourage you because God had Nehemiah where he was for a reason. And could very well be that God has you where you are for a reason as well. 100%. So I hope that that's a little bit of encouragement there. But I love the fact that Nehemiah just was there, right? And you think about how God did this with people like Esther and Daniel and Joseph. These were all the same situation. They were serving in godless societies and governments, but God used them. And so this is kind of how it is with Nehemiah. So the story starts, and it says he's in Susa, and Susa was kind of like the capital of Persia. It's kind of like the Washington, D.C. It was the center, and while he's there, he gets a visit from his brother. And the first thing that he does is he says, hey, man, what's going on in Jerusalem? And verse 2, he said, I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that survived the exile. So they had just come from Judah. So Nehemiah's like, man, tell me what's going on. How's the city? How are the people? How's the temple? What's going on? And, I'm sure they probably talked about some other things, but all that was recorded in his diary was like, I wanted to know what was going on in Judah.
Right. That was the first thing on his mind.
Yeah. And I think that's important to remember. That's what mattered to him. And the report that his brother gives is a devastating picture. Like he says, those who survived the exile are back in the province. They're in great trouble and disgrace. I think that I read somewhere as I was studying this week that the Hebrew word was chaos.
Really?
That was used. It was just chaos. Like, there's people there. The temple has been rebuilt, but there's no wall around the city, and there's chaos. There's no way to keep security. All the things we talked about that a wall does.
Right.
And so there's three things really in that answer. Like the remnant, there's only a few people. Jerusalem used to be a great place. There was a lot of people there. Now there's just a few left. It used to be a magnificent city, and now it's in ruins still. And then there's the word reproach, which is, it used to be a city that shone with the glory of God, and now it's like it's in disgrace.
Yeah.
And here's what happens when Nehemiah hears the response or the answer to the question. The Bible says, he says, when I heard these things, I sat down and I wept. And I mean, and again, we're looking at a guy thinking about who Nehemiah is. He's a sharp guy. He's well-spoken. He's articulate. He puts his life on the line every day for the king. He's in a difficult place. He's a light in a dark place. And he hears about his homeland, and he just wept.
Yeah.
And then he says, for some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. And so I think it's interesting, and I want to kind of switch gears just a little bit and talk about something that I think is important. But I think that what happens is Nehemiah's response to this report reveals his heart.
Yes.
Like if you don't care about something, you don't weep for it.
Right.
Like this is just a opening. It's like giving us an inside picture of his heart. It's like this is what matters to him. And I think that in our life, that something that creates an emotional response for us is often indicative of something that we're passionate about.
Yep.
Like you don't get passionate about things, or you don't get emotional about things you're not passionate about.
Right.
And I think about this, like there are a million injustices in the world, right? I mean, we could sit here and name 50 injustices in the world. Yep. But not all of them move us emotionally.
Right.
There are tragedies that happen every day all around us, but not all of them move us. But there are some that do move us.
Yep.
And the ones that do move us and affect us reveal something about the burdens that we carry and the passions that we have.
Right.
And so I wanted to just kind of explore a little bit what a burden is, because that's really this whole story is about the burden that Nehemiah had,
right,
and what he did about it. And so I think that probably all of us have burdens or passions. You can kind of use that word interchangeably or whatever. But if you were to look up the word burden, it's in a theological dictionary, it would be a deep concern or weight about something that God causes or that God allows to settle on a person's heart. And I think it's interesting because there's two parts to that, right?
Yep.
So one, God could literally cause us, he puts inside us this desire or this care about something. And so he literally causes it, or he allows it to settle and weigh heavy on our heart.
Yeah.
And I think about Philippians chapter 2, verse 13. It says, it is God who works in you to will and act according to his good purpose. So it's literally the Lord who allows certain things to bug us,
right,
to drive us crazy, to create emotional responses in us. And that thing, like when you see a list of 50 tragedies or injustices in the world, when you read a list of them and one of them sticks out, there's a reason that one sticks out, and maybe it's because of that. So we use different words today and phrases to describe a burden, especially in the church world. Right. But like, you could say a burden is like a deep concern. It's an emotional weight. It's a holy dissatisfaction. I like that. I have a heart for something. I think another word that is really a good describer of a burden, but we don't want to use this word much, is responsibility. Or I have a compassion towards something, or a bent toward that, or a calling, or a vision, or a dream. And so those are things that God gives us, and you can have a burden or a passion for something that's not God given, right. But there are things in our life that God causes us to care about, or things that he allows to weigh heavy on our heart. and those are God given. Yeah. And as I was studying, I came across a distinction between something that is a concern or a burden, because we can be concerned about a lot of things. Yeah. So if I have a concern says I see a problem. Mm-hmm. A burden says I can't shake the feeling that I have to do something about it. Mm. So we probably all have lots of concerns. Like I can see this. This is like I see problems everywhere. Right. Like they're everywhere, right? And we all see problems everywhere. Mm-hmm. But some of the problems, I'm like, I don't need to do anything about that. Right. That's not my deal. But there are some problems that I see, and I'm like, I can't let that go. Mm-hmm. I have to do something about that. I think a good example of that, I mean, it's obvious probably for everybody, is Martin Luther King, right? Yeah. And you could say that what motivated him was the burden of racial inequality, especially for his children, right? He's like, I want my children to be treated like everybody else. And it weighed so heavy. Like everybody had that concern back then. Yes. Every black person for sure. Yeah. Many others, but they all had that concern. And many people didn't do anything about it. But Martin Luther King's like, this will move me to action and to give my life for it. Yep. It was a burden. It was a passion. And he couldn't sleep at night. He couldn't stay silent. He had to do something about it. Yeah. And if you listen to his "I Have a Dream" speech, there was no way he could exist without doing something about it. Right. And so he has this burden, right? And then there's in the church world, we use terminology that isn't always used in the rest of the world, but I think a God-given burden often becomes a passion or a calling. Mm-hmm. And so a calling then is something that God asks you to do or that you feel compelled to do. Yeah. Right? And that's what's happening to Nehemiah. Like he cares about it. It's a concern for his brother comes from there. He asks, how's it going? And his brother tells him, and he's like, broken. Yeah. Like I have to do something about it. Mm-hmm. And here's what's interesting. Nowhere in the book of Nehemiah does God say, Nehemiah, go rebuild the wall. Yeah. Like I checked. Yeah. I thought that God asked him to do it. Yeah. God never asked him to do it. Mm-hmm. Like it never says, Nehemiah, I want you to go rebuild the wall. Yeah. Nehemiah, do this. Nehemiah, do that. What happened is that Nehemiah understood the burden or the passion as God's invitation to join him. Right. And
that's good.
And if we have burdens or passions that are God given, then it turns into a calling that God says, I want you to do this. And if he doesn't ask us, then by virtue of the call or the burden that we have, we should feel compelled to do it. Yeah. And we should join God in the work that he's doing. Yep. And to not join him in the work that he's doing is to shirk our responsibility, which is another word you could call for burden. Right. But we don't want to do that because that puts us on the hook.
Exactly.
So
that's good.
It's like, I was very, very, it was a meaningful moment in my study. Yeah. When I realized God did not ask him to do this. Mm-hmm. But he was compelled to do it. Yeah. And the reason he was compelled is because God laid that burden on him. And so the question is, and we'll talk about this tomorrow, we'll talk more about burdens and passions and callings and those kind of things. Mm-hmm. But the question is, is God putting a burden? Do you have a burden? Right. And if you do, to not do it, to not join God in the invitation he's given you to work with him to right a wrong or injustice or whatever it might be, is to ignore the responsibility he's laying on us. Yep. And that's interesting.
That is interesting.
Stuff, yeah.
Well, it's like, it makes me think of how many times I've talked to people that are like, I don't hear from God. It's like, I'm waiting for that, like, voice of the Lord to tell me exactly what to do. Yeah. And that's what I love, that we can't put God in a box. And like, there's so many ways he speaks to us, whether that is through, some big booming voice or that's through his word, or whether that's he's already put passions in us. And he's like, this is my way of talking to you. Yeah. This is my way of calling you. Yeah. And that's for all of us. Yep. Like we all have that at some point. Yeah. And that's just the beautiful way God works, man.
Well, the other thing that people do is like, I have a burden that this needs to happen. So what are you going to do about it? And they'll lay it on you. I'm like, no, if God's given you the burden, you need to do something about it. Yep. And the really cool thing is that we all carry different burdens. And there's a reason for that.
Yes.
Because there's many needs that God wants us to help him with.
Yep.
And you can't do them all, but you can do the one you're passionate about.
Right.
And that's why he gives you that passion. So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And he gifts us all for that differently.
Yeah.
You know, like there's certain things that like, you know, you're a pastor, you've done this way longer than I have. And how many thousands of times somebody's come up to you and like, man, I see this need in our church and you need to go do something about it. It's like, well, maybe I didn't see that need. And the reason God showed you that need is because he's gifted you to go and do it.
Well, I can tell you 100% that's why.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, there's a level of responsibility that a pastor carries, but it's not to do everything.
Right.
And if God's given someone a burden about something,
Yep.
he gave them a burden for a reason.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the whole point. You know, the church is a body and
Yeah.
we're all different parts of that come
Yeah.
together to make up one big body. So,
Yeah.
man, so maybe that's you. Maybe that's you right now that God has put a burden on your heart that's like, I need to do something about this, man. That's God's way of saying it's time.
Join me.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
And so maybe God's put that burden on your heart. Maybe you're listening to this and you just don't have the resources or the direction on what that looks like for your next step. We'd like to know. That's something that our job is as pastors is to help guide you in the direction where you can be used the way that God has called you to be used.
And tomorrow we'll have some steps.
Yep, exactly. So that means you got to listen in tomorrow, man.
Yeah.
You got to be here tomorrow. Well, we can't wait to talk to you more about that. And we're so glad that you joined us today. And we hope that you have an amazing rest of your day. And we'll see you tomorrow. See ya.
This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.